There was tremendous pressure. They would say, you don't have the right to divorce him until we go through a process to grant you the divorce. And so then I would say, okay, well, let's start the process then. And then they would say, we're not at that point yet. And it kept going like that for 4 years.
4 years. I'm Gretchen Baskerville, and I started leading Christian divorce recovery groups in conservative evangelical churches in 1998, more than 25 years ago. Today, we're going to hear from two members of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church denomination as they tell us how they were trapped for years in very destructive marriages by church leaders. They were repeatedly coerced and pressured by the pastor to stay with their spouses. These aren't women who were just looking for the grass is greener, or who missed the party life, or were just too immature to make the marriage commitment. I think you'll agree that these are godly women of faith who put their time and energy where their mouth is. Caroline was the backbone of her church, volunteering hours every month. Allison was a pastor's wife. We, as the church, must do better for these women and men who are married to people who may have paid lip service to the Lord, but chose behaviors that were deceptive and cruel, often involved in horrible patterns. Pedophiles, serial adulterers, physical batterers, emotional abusers, sexually immoral, sex traffickers, and swindlers. I'm interviewing Caroline McEwen and Allison Girardi. Caroline has started a new organization for Presbyterians who are stuck in that church counseling merry-go-round that never allows people to escape their marriages. Her organization is called the Presbyterian Advocacy Coalition. I want you to hear Caroline and Allison's stories. Their pastor threatened them with church discipline if they divorced, yet they chose to get to safety come what may. They have no regrets that they chose to end their marriage to save their lives and sanity, and the Lord has brought them to a new place of relative peace, safety, and stability. So I'm going to start with Caroline first. Tell me a little bit about your childhood, what you were taught by your parents or about the church, about the importance of marriage. If you were kind of a goody two-shoes, talk about that too.
Thank you, Gretchen. I actually grew up in an abusive situation myself as a child, but it was also a very religious environment. And I always say I think that set me up for the abuse later, for getting into an abusive marriage, because I was used to suppressing all of the things that I really needed, really wanted to talk about, all of those things that would be important in a marriage to be heard, used to kind of keeping them down and thinking of, well, I have to take care of everyone around me. I have to make sure that they're okay. I have to put their needs first. And that was really what I was taught also, is this is the Christian thing to do, especially for women, that you keep your own personal needs quiet. You keep yourself very small. I always say to people now, and you allow the other person, the abuser, to sort of get bigger and bigger in what they need and what they demand from you. And that the godly thing is just to be quiet, to accept it, to smile, and to carry on. And so I think that set me up really for the situation, because I married very young, married when I had barely turned 19, to a man that was significantly older than me. And there should have been red flags all over that situation, but I didn't see them, I think partly because of the way that I grew up.
Yeah, I get that. It is tough to see them. A fish doesn't know it's wet, right? If you've been raised that way, how would you see red flags like that? So, how did they couch the religious language around this? What did they tell you biblically to make this seem okay?
Well, they would tell me that, well, the classic, you should turn the other cheek, you should, I, You should forgive, all of those things. And also just that Christians don't divorce. I heard that many times. You don't even speak the word divorce. To even say the word divorce, it could be a sinful thing that could end up in the destruction of your marriage. And now I see that as kind of the cart before the horse, because if you get to the point of talking about a divorce, probably a lot of stuff has already happened.
Right.
But that wasn't the connection that I made at the time. So I went into marriage very committed. Even though I was young, I really meant that it was going to be forever. I had no intentions of it being a short-term thing, or not taking it seriously. And in fact, I think my upbringing and the way that I was taught that you keep your own needs down. It's the marriage that's important. It's that marriage isn't supposed to make you happy. It's supposed to make you holy. All of those things uh, really kept me trapped in it, kept me from um, from responding to the things that were happening and over the years. So I ended up actually married to him for 25 years, which, if that tells you something about my level of
Right.
commitment, considering everything that was going on.
No, I mean, 25 years is absolutely a commitment. I often say to people, the day you walked right back into that house after having been betrayed or abused in some way showed that you had commitment beyond, thinking of yourself. You went in there believing it was the right thing to do. You've already put your life on the line. Let's switch over to Allison. Allison, tell us about your childhood, what you were taught about marriage by your parents or about the church, about the sanctity of marriage, and your commitment to marriage.
Yeah, certainly. I grew up at this church. So my family joined when I was 2 years old, and my father actually came to faith in that church. We made our professions of faith, and my brother, sister, and I were baptized when I was, I think, 3 or 4 years old. It's actually one of my very first memories is being baptized at the church. So I was raised from 2 years old. Went to Sunday school there. I was a part of the church choir, and I made my own profession of faith at age 14. And yeah, so I grew up there. I went to a Christian school. I was really a devout Christian. I was going through childhood, through my teenage years, and up through this debauchery, I guess.
So did
Yeah.
you weren't the kind of kid who was sneaking out at night, doing drugs, running
No.
around,
No,
running
I was
away?
not. And my friend from the time still have one good friend from the middle school, just would tell me what a straight and narrow path you were on. Never swore, never even watched anything that had swear words in it. Yeah, never even
Got it.
considered doing anything that was out of that straight and narrow line. So
So you really
yeah,
took your faith and the church's teachings about marriage very seriously. I'm going to go back
yeah.
to Caroline. Tell me about the promises your church made to you about the wonderful aspects of marriage if you did it right, such as, being a stay-at-home wife and mother and things like that.
I think for me, the stay-at-home wife and mother wasn't as intense a pressure, because partly because my husband never wanted me to be that. And they were real big on, you should do what your husband wants you to do. And my husband's vision when he married me, and he said this straight out, like it wasn't a secret. He said, I married you because you're smart, and I feel like you can support me, and I can retire and no longer have to work.
Whoa,
Um,
whoa, whoa, whoa. Like as soon as you got married, he was going to retire?
Right. But well, I mean, his idea was, because I hadn't even gone to college yet, but he said, he'll help me go to college and then I'd get some great job. He would be able to retire and wouldn't have to work anymore. That was what he had wanted.
Wow.
So he So there wasn't as much pressure on me to like to stop working or something, but there was just a lot of this idea of you can nice him into things. You can, if you are kind enough to him, if you apologize to him for things and forgive him when he does, then everything will be okay. If you confront him, that was another thing. Confront him when he does these bad things. He'll realize his sin and he'll repent and everything will turn around. Um, and so that was something I tried over and over again to do, thinking that I could, by my own attitudes and kindness to him and forgiveness, somehow make him turn around or make him want to do good things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear this over and over that we're supposed to set this amazing godly example, that the Jesus who lives inside of us, that love will heal whatever childhood wounds they have. And
Mhm.
that we just need to be loving and loving and loving, and therefore uh, eventually they will change. Some Christian authors call this a godly influence, but what they actually mean is that you can control, they promise that you can control your spouse if you're just super sweet enough and persistent enough. And
Yes.
I imagine you don't find that to be true.
No, I I mean, I think it actually made him worse. I think that as I kept forgiving him for things that he did, all of the, the infidelity and the abuse with the money and all of the things that happened, that actually seemed to lead him to just expect that that was his right, that he should be forgiven all the time, that there were no real consequences for anything he did. Um, it actually made him worse, but to the bitter end. In fact, one of the last things that was said to me by the wife of one of the elders, um, when I was telling her just how terrible the marriage was, all of the horrible things that were going on, and she stopped me and said, "I just want to ask you, do you ever tell him things you appreciate about him? Because maybe he does this because you don't appreciate him." And so there it was again, like, well, you are responsible for his behavior. And if you were doing your part, he would be a better person.
Okay, let me ask you, Caroline, did you
Mm.
ever tell him how much you appreciated him?
All the time.
Yeah, like
And that was what was so
millions
funny.
of times, I'll bet, in
Yes.
20-something years. Yes. Allison, tell me about the promises the church made to you about these wonderful aspects about marriage, as long as you, the wife, did absolutely everything right. What did they promise you, and did you do it?
So I grew up in purity culture. So
Purity
purity
culture.
culture,
Okay.
yes. I mean, we didn't go as far as to have the ring, the physical ring. However, the mindset and the influence of you remain pure until you are married. So I
Right.
took that to heart. I did not date in high school. I had one college boyfriend that was maybe about 6 months. And so my ex was my second boyfriend, and it was a courtship type situation as opposed to a dating situation.
Okay, so
So
those of us who are insiders, Allison, we know what you're saying. When
mhm,
you're talking about purity culture, you're really talking about not only being a virgin the day
mhm.
you marry, but oftentimes not even kissing or, what would commonly be called petting before marriage or before the altar. Is that kind of
Mhm.
what we're talking about?
So we're talking about, so we were kissing. Yes, kissing was okay.
Okay, kissing was okay
Um,
in your church and
yes,
in
but
your
but
culture.
the petting and yeah, any other contact was not okay.
Okay, and then explain for the audience what you mean by courtship, because courtship is a concept that's very common in very conservative evangelical and reformed churches. So explain how the courtship model works, or how it worked for you.
Yeah, the courtship model basically was you meet out in public, you're never alone, and you have never have any sexual contact of any kind, that it just just discussion talking about our plan for the future. So there's no intimacy, there's no anything. We did not go as far as to have a chaperone because a lot of the conservatives do have chaperones, which means there's a third person there to make sure you're being pure during your relationship until you're married. But we didn't go quite that far. However, we did have the pastor asking us constantly, are you remaining pure? Are you remaining pure?
Okay.
So we had that hovering in that sense, not so much of a physical sense.
So you knew what the guidelines were and you stayed within them.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And
So
and your understanding was that if you did it God's way or the church's way, what would happen?
that God would bless you.
Okay.
God would bless you. He would shower you with blessings. Your marriage would be pure. You would be, you would have God blessing showered on you. That was the promise.
Yeah, in when I was being brought up, the promise was basically you'd have this amazing, emotionally close marriage,
Mhm.
and you would have mind-blowing sex. And
Mhm.
that's what we were promised. If we were virgins when we went down that aisle and we loved the Lord and we had prayed about our spouse, we were almost guaranteed these things. It was horrifying for myself, and I'm sure for you ladies, to discover that this godly, loving marriage that we thought we were getting into was really anything but that. Now I'm going to go back to Caroline. Tell me about your own devotion to the Lord. When you entered marriage, how important was your faith? Was your service to the church? Maybe give us an example about how you volunteered or tithed or served at great expense to your own well-being.
That describes me very accurately, and Allison can attest to this because she knew me when I was at Calvary, and I did everything at that church. Um, when I started attending it, fairly shortly after I started attending there, I did approach the pastor and tell him something about what was wrong in the marriage, and it was at a real crisis point, and I was terrified of what was going on in my marriage, that I was being pressured to do things that were sinful. And so I went to him and I said, I need your help. And he kind of disregarded me. I mean, he said, well, I'll talk to your husband. He went and talked to my husband one time. My husband was just enraged and furious and threatening at me, for talking to the pastor. But then nothing happened after that. And my interpretation of it was that he didn't really believe me or I wasn't valuable enough to the church. And so my reaction to that was, I have to become more important to the church so that they will appreciate, so they will understand me, so they will listen. So I just threw myself into all kinds of things. I was um, writing curriculum for Vacation Bible School and helping to develop the Vacation Bible School program. And I was church secretary, and I built the website, and I taught Sunday school for the kids for years. And I put together special events and made flyers and I mean, it was anything you can imagine I was doing. I even helped to renovate the church, including I myself did a lot of the repainting and so on of the pastor's office and decorating of the pastor's office. So just anything that needed to be done, I was jumping in there quick to do it, thinking I was making myself more valuable so that the next time they would listen to me.
Yeah, I mean, here you are a loyal, valuable, proven member of the church. And when you come to them for help, you get shined on. You get, poo-pooed. You get told, try harder, or, um, you're not taken seriously. And I hear this over and over. It We feel so betrayed because we were so involved at church. And
True.
we weren't just, the occasional attender. We were the backbone of the church. We're
Mhm.
exactly the kind of church church member that every pastor wants. And yet when we become in crisis, somehow we don't matter. Our problem is swept under the carpet. Let's go over to you, Allison. Same question. Talk to me about your devotion to the Lord.
So one of the reasons that my ex and I married and connected and married was because he desired to become a pastor, and I had been praying since I was 9 years old to become a pastor's wife.
Mm,
So here I am, 19 years old. Oh my goodness, you're right in front of me. And we grew up together. So his father is still an elder in this church. And we were close with the families. And so I've known you my whole life. Here you are right in front of me. What an answer to prayer. I
yeah,
was so thrilled. So that was an answer to prayer for me.
yeah.
All through my teenage years, I was a teaching assistant for Sunday school. I started to receive mentorship to become a pastor's wife when we made our commitment to each other. So, I mean, we attended every church service, every prayer meeting. We even led mission trips down to Wildwood, New Jersey, and served at the chapel there. Took a group of the kids down a couple of summers in a row after we were married, and just fulfilling the ministry that I had desired to do.
Yep. You signed up for a life of service to be a pastor's
Yeah.
wife. You loved the Lord, you loved the church, and this is what you
Hmm.
wanted to do. So you were fully prepared to lay down your life to do whatever it took. Going
Hmm.
back to Caroline now, we're going to talk about when your marriage, you started noticing that the marriage was having difficulties and you started asking for help from the church. So tell me briefly when you first noticed your marriage was having problems, maybe a little bit about the issues, and tell me, what you tried. Did you try to keep it a secret? And when you did share, maybe with a women's Bible study leader or with the pastor, whoever you were close with, what tips did other people give you?
Well, my marriage problems had really been from the beginning. And like I said, I married my husband when I was barely 19, and I'd only been dating him for about 3 months, I think. And so I didn't know him well, but he was a son of some missionaries and he was very involved in his church. And I just read a lot into that. And so we got married pretty quick. And almost immediately afterward, I found out he was in a lot of debt and hadn't told me.
Mm,
And so and I just being so young, I hardly even knew what debt was, but I was immediately like, okay, we can fix this. I jumped in and, we're going to pay this off and but then it just kept happening throughout the marriage. All of a sudden I turn around and find out we had a bunch of credit cards I didn't know about and things. And then I started finding other things that suggested that there was infidelity going on. Um, but I didn't really know what to do. And so the reason that we joined this church in Schenectady was because I wanted to get things on the right path. I had wanted to be attending to church all along, but almost as soon as we got married, my husband had stopped attending church and he had kept saying to me, well, when we find the right one, but the right one never came along. And so finally, when with this church, I had said, okay, I want to stay here. I want to get our children baptized. I want to get us on the right track. We need some help. And so the going to church was partly to establish our family in faith, to get us on the right path, trying to salvage the family. And but didn't realize, I guess, how bad things were because a lot of things were kind of kept under the carpet by my husband. And there was just some times when things would come up that didn't make a lot of sense. And I think, where did all that money go or something like that? But he had me blocked out of the finances. So I didn't know what was going on with us financially. And he would just disappear for long periods of time. But then he always had explanations. Well, this happened, that happened. So I just and he would keep telling me, well, you're just paranoid because, you were abused as a child and now you're paranoid. And so I would think, okay, this is my own problem and I need to work on it. But then things started to become very intensely abusive not long after we started attending the church. And that was when I'd started trying to get the pastor involved. And for the most part, this pastor was just with me. I think with other women, he was more aggressive. And I think partly maybe because I was doing so much for the church, I found out later. I mean, I thought he just didn't like me, and that was why he was treating me this way. And I realized later, I think he actually treated me better than he treated some of them. And that with
Wow.
me, mostly, he was just negligent. Like he just wouldn't do anything. And I would come in there with some big news of something that happened that was absolutely shocking. And some infidelity or debauchery or whatever, and he would just kind of be like, okay, well, these things happen sometimes, and you just forgive. And now that he knows that we know, he'll turn it around. He's not going to do it again. He would tell me over and over again he's not going to do it again, and every time he did it again. But then the
Boy,
next time I would bring it to the pastor, it would be the same. Don't worry, it's fine now. He won't do it again.
isn't it amazing how willfully blind some of these people are? They don't have, they're like a one-trick pony. That's all they can say. He'll be so embarrassed, he won't do it again. But but they've done it over and over and over again. Your
Mhm.
advice is ridiculous and laughable. Of course, we can't say that because we have respect for them and we want to have our own dignity intact. But it's amazing how ineffective. What do you wish he had done?
I mean, at the time, uh, I think different things early on. I just wanted him to confront my husband, to really come up with a plan for him to things he needed to do, ways he needed to change. As time went on and my husband became more abusive, I stopped even wanting that because my confronting my husband, or the extent to which the pastor was occasionally talking to him or something, was just resulting in a lot more abuse to me. He became very retaliatory, my husband did. And so I became more and more frightened of anyone talking to him. And I wanted the pastor to help me to get out of the situation. I wanted him to give me a divorce. And he would just keep saying to me, "We're not at that point yet. We're
He's,
not."
he's
And
not
I
at
would
this
say,
point
"Well,
yet.
yes."
But he
And I
lives,
would say, because
he
I was
lived
fairly,
in this blind world,
Mhm.
it's just
Yeah.
amazing
And
how,
I was fairly outspoken with him, so sometimes
yeah,
I would say to him, "No, you mean you're not at that point yet, but I live in the house with this.
right.
Imagine if all your money was being spent on other women and things. How would you feel?" And again, there was just often when I would talk like that, he would just say, when you're so shrill, it's hard to want to help you."
Uh, it's all your fault because
Mhm.
it's your tone or your attitude. Like you should be really okay with all your money disappearing.
Right. If
You
you were a
know,
good wife, you'd be all
yeah,
right with
you'd
that.
be okay with it.
Yes.
And this is there are people listening to this who get it completely, and there are other people going, why didn't this guy see that there was a pattern going on and genuinely help this woman get to safety, get her children to safety, and get away from this guy who's basically going to destroy her financial stability. He probably already has destroyed her financial stability. There is no genuine love here. It's all selfishness. And you can't have a good marriage with someone who is completely self-indulged. So let me throw the ball to Allison now. Same questions. When did you first notice that your marriage was having some serious problems? And then what did you try? Did you keep it a secret? Did you tell anyone?
My issues were mostly sexual in nature.
Mm.
So that was the gist of the abuse in my marriage. The finances, I was also shut out of the finances because that's the husband's role. I didn't realize until about a year into our marriage that all of the savings that we had was gone.
Oh
It
my
was
goodness.
gone.
All
Yeah.
your
So
savings was gone?
all of our savings were gone, and I was told it was, oh, we had to pay the bills at the end of every month. We didn't have enough money at the end of each month to pay the bills. I said, well, where did it go? Like, to pay the bills. So that was the only answer I got as far as finances. The biggest issue, though, was sexual in nature, where you grow up, like I said before, we grow up in that purity culture where it is absolutely the most unforgivable sin that you could commit to have sex out of wedlock. I've seen people be excommunicated for having children out of wedlock, to be disciplined, to be chastised. As horrible things happen to these people. And then all of a sudden, you get married and you flip the switch. It's like, oh, now it's okay. Now, not only is it okay, now you're required to do this. This is your job as a wife. This is
So,
what you have to do.
so once you're married, anything that happens in this marriage, you just have to put up with. Is that the message?
Yes.
Okay.
So what I know now, though, having worked with somatics over the last 10, 12 years, your body doesn't catch up with your mind like that. When you're taught, when you and your mind and your body, your spirit are taught that something is so horribly, horribly wrong, your body just like, okay, your body's wrong. So now all of a sudden you flip that switch, your body has a reaction that this is wrong and it protects you. So I developed a physical condition that's actually very common, and I know this now, very common in virgin women, especially if they grew up in purity culture. So this happened. I didn't know what to do. Like, what is going on with me? What's wrong? And my ex was, well, this is my right, so I'm gonna do it. We have to do this. So
Are we talking about sexual
sexual
intercourse?
activity.
Right.
Yes, intercourse,
So it became
activity.
forced. It was no
Yes,
longer a mutual loving coming together of
right.
intimacy and listening to one another. It became a forced,
Yes,
coerced, pressured
yeah. So
situation.
everything that purity culture was designed to protect you from happened in your marriage.
Mm,
So so that was the nature of my abuse. So, I'm 21 years old, and I was a young 21-year-old because I also have hearing loss. So that also has made me a very young 21-year-old too. You miss a lot. You miss a lot when we have
sure.
hearing loss.
Yeah.
So I'm 21 years old, and it's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to turn. I was good friends with the pastor's wife there because we were going to be a pastor, and we connected when they first came to the church. I confided in her, like, this is going on. What do I do? She told her husband, our pastor, and then our pastor emailed both my ex and me to come in for a post-marital follow-up.
Mm.
So we're talking about finance. This was a couple of months after we got married. So we're talking about finance, whatever. And then he asked us straight out the question, and how is sex?
How's your sex life?
So, first of all, not realizing this is not a normal question that a pastor should be asking. And second of all, putting two and two together, like, oh, well, she must have told him, because how else or why else would he be asking about this?
Mhm.
And he said, don't worry, I can help you.
Mm. Uh-oh.
Yeah. So, and I'm like, okay. Okay, well, if you can help, that's great.
So how did he attempt to help?
Yeah. So then goes on the next 5 years of counseling. He initially discouraged doctor visits.
Oh my.
Yeah,
Okay.
initially. Eventually he encouraged it, but initially discouraged doctor visits.
Okay.
Um,
Are we talking about vaginismus?
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
Vaginismus.
this is a scientific and a medical condition
Yes.
where you put women under tremendous amount of stress and pressure about sexuality, and they end up developing either physical condition where penetration is difficult, if not impossible, and it's not anything they control. It's based on fear and anxiety and the pressure. And a woman named Sheila Gregoire wrote a book about vaginismus. She herself suffered from it in the early years of her marriage. And a lot of it is due to these purity culture teachings, where for the first 20 or so years of your life, sex is not okay. And suddenly, not only is it okay, it's demanded of you. And that's just a pretty destructive combination. It can be overcome, but it probably needs to be overcome with, real professional medical or psychological help. Probably isn't anything
Right.
that anyone's pastor should be, um, very interested in. That's a little invasive and might be even a little voyeuristic. Was that your situation? Am I overstepping?
Yes, exactly, it was. And now I'm a massage therapist and I work in physical therapy offices. They treat this condition like it's nothing. I mean, it's like, oh, okay, this is a pelvic floor issue and there's pelvic floor treatments. So they treat it like it's just a condition to overcome. If we have a neck condition, knee condition, recovering from surgery, they treat it. So it's definitely treatable. However, the invasive questions, a lot of invasive questions, I mean, specific, he wanted specific details of my issues, of our sexual life.
Yeah, when he does this, what do you do? I've got to be really honest with you, and I'm going to say this because the man I'm talking about is already dead. But I had a therapist like this. He already had his master's in family and marriage therapy. He was a Christian and he was a pastor. He was getting his PhD, and he was way too interested in sexuality, sexual thoughts, sexual, positions, sexual activity. And I I now know that what he was asking me was completely unprofessional and inappropriate. And I would bet that a ton of women have really been violated by voyeuristic pastors and church leaders in by asking these kinds of questions. Somehow that appeals to their sexuality, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we would talk on instant messenger at night.
You and the pastor.
Yeah, yes, at a counseling session, he would take me in a car ride with his children in the back seat to talk about this stuff. It was very violating.
Yeah, that is a total violation. And I know that there's somebody listening to this right now who has gone through this or is going through it right now. And if you have a pastor or a therapist who is asking you these kinds of invasive, highly intimate sexual details, you definitely need to find someone else. This is inappropriate.
Yeah.
So anyway, go on with your story.
As I said, we had the next really 5 years
5 years of this where
of
he,
counseling, yeah. And the worst part of it is when we moved to Dyer, Indiana to attend a seminary there, where our counseling sessions were continued by email and instant messenger.
wow.
Because the phone, at that point, the phone was difficult because I couldn't hear. So that's how I have everything documented, both
Oh my goodness.
us,
So you
yeah,
have all these conversations documented on top of
yes.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, oh man.
Yes.
Is this man still in ministry?
Yeah, I
Yes.
believe you just preached this past Sunday. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's pretty shocking.
Yeah, well,
Wow.
you can find some articles about us that, well, Caroline and I have come out in this article and find the name of the church and the name of the pastor in that. Yeah,
Mhm.
Times Union, it came out in the local paper in Schenectady.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
If
Yeah.
I can add something to Allison's story, if that's okay, Allison, because of
Mhm.
my involvement in that, I would say it was even worse than that for Allison because she and I were friends at the time. I had become friends with her, just kind of helping her with some of her hearing issues at the church, and we were trying to work on ways for her to better hear sermons because that's how devoted she was. She was like, I'm missing the sermons and I want to hear. And so I had said, well, we'll try to work things out. And so we had kind of become friends. And I went to the pastor with some of her concerns. She confided some of them to me. And he told me that she was just crazy and that she just needed mental help. And he would say things like, well, he would say that she was after him, that she was pursuing him romantically and that so he really threw her under the bus, and to my shame I believed him, and I ended up ending the friendship with Allison in a way that still haunts me to this day. But but in this, at the same time as he was supposedly counseling her and helping her, he was spreading all kinds of misinformation about her to her friends and other people in the church.
Many of these churches, there are membership contracts, which are usually just called, membership forms, where they actually have power over you, legitimate power. The church elders have power over you. These are not consensual. It sure sounds to me like this is a pastor who's wielding inappropriate authority. She's not the guilty party here. She was trusting her minister, her guide, her mentor, to take her in the right direction. And instead he used her, it sounds like. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know it's easy to believe a pastor and to turn against someone else in the church. Is your friendship strong now?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
I
Okay.
am very grateful for Allison being a wonderful, forgiving person. And she was so just gracious to me about what happened. And so I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, I mean,
How long did it take for the two of you for you to realize the truth and for the two of you to reconcile?
It really wasn't until it happened to me that because the pastor never was sexually inappropriate towards me. And even though we were very close and we worked, I mean, I was his secretary, all that. So I didn't really even consider that he might have been with someone else, but I just think now he just wasn't romantically attracted to me. I'm older and so on. Um, so I assumed all those years that even when as things started to get worse and worse in my own marriage and he was treating me badly, he wasn't doing the same things to me as he was to Allison. And the fallacy with that is always that we tend to assume that if it hasn't happened to us, it hasn't happened to anyone. And so I still kept assuming that up until finally when I got pushed out of the church. And then it started really bothering me thinking about Allison and thinking, I wonder if there's more to that story. And so I did reach out to her when I started taking the case to Presbytery, as we will probably talk about in a moment. And um, and I just asked her about it. And even at that point, I thought, maybe she was, as a young person, just still thinking she was romantically attracted to the pastor, but hey, he still shouldn't have, that kind of thing. And then she shared her evidence with me, and it was absolutely mind-boggling, that I realized as soon as I read it, she wasn't after him, he was after her. It's very obvious. He was the one pursuing her, writing to her, saying things like, can you tell me about intimacy? How about now? What did you do about this? Did you follow my guidelines about positioning? Things like that, where he clearly was the one who was keeping this going. And that really changed my mindset about him, and where I suddenly realized, listen, just because it didn't happen to me doesn't mean that it didn't happen to her.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Allison?
Yeah, well, I believe it was 3 years ago now that we got back
Mm.
in touch. And well, first of all, I was absolutely heartbroken for Caroline that she went through, something similar with her marriage and the similar treatment. And so my heart just, yeah, I just had nothing but compassion for her, because I knew she was in a rough spot. I didn't know the extent, but I knew that she was in a rough spot even when we were close at the church. And so my heart was just broken. And then all the other women who came after me as well, because there have been other women who came after me and before me, that this is a pattern and this is unbelievable. And Caroline was just like, Allison, I'm so sorry. And I don't even think about it anymore, because I understand the brainwashing that this man does.
Yeah.
I fell to it as well. Yeah, I went against my family on things. I argued and, thought my own family was wrong in things. So I understand that mindset. So I don't even consider it anymore. I mean, it is forgiven. It is forgiven. It is behind me, and we are just moving forward and try to get this man to stop, or the system to stop this.
Right.
That's what our focus is. I mean, look at what I mean. It breaks up friendship.
Yeah.
I mean, sisterhood. It destroys relationships.
When you realize that, behind the scenes there's this abusive system, then you realize that a lot of people have gotten brainwashed or just told, that this is the godly way of doing things, and it takes a while to kind of get your thoughts clear, and I think there are times that we do have to apologize for misreading a situation. Well, let's move on, because I think this was a perfect lead in to my next question. Did they indicate any desire, Caroline, to protect you, children? Did they want it to be hush hush? Did they have any advice or plan or curriculum? Did they give you, some churches give you just endless hurdles to jump. They don't respect you saying, no, I've jumped every hurdle. I have tried every technique. I have read every Christian marriage book. I have turned myself inside out, trying to be more godly, more loving, setting a better and better example. I am done. And I wish churches would realize that it's your call. I mean, they had their name isn't on your marriage license, your name is. And, it's not their call whether you can divorce or not, at least not here in the United States. Divorce is a civil matter. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm ranting now, but go for it, Caroline. What happened when this all came to a head and you started to think, maybe this is the end of my marriage?
That happened for me in around December of 2014, when I began to uncover my husband's secret life, that I had started to get just more and more suspicious of things, and he was actually in training to become an elder at that point. Or at least he had begun the process to, and said that he wanted to become an elder at the church. And so, um, I had said to the pastor initially, "Wow, he seems like he's doing a lot better these days." And then there was something in my mind that said, "Yeah, but there's a lot of things that don't add up." And so I finally said, "You know what? I have to just try to find out what's going on with our finances. I don't understand why we're always broke." Because I was teaching at a college at that point. He had a full-time business in painting and wallpapering. And so what finally went to the bank and got bank statements, and that was when the whole thing started to unravel, because I realized he was stealing money from just about everywhere. I mean, every time where else I looked, I would find more. He had us on welfare benefits that we didn't remotely qualify for. He had stolen money from the church, from the Christian school, from Social Security. I mean, it went on and on. He had all kinds of loans in my name I didn't know about. The mortgage hadn't been paid for more than a year. Um, and it was just, and the vast quantities of money had just disappeared. And I started to even look around the house, and I opened a drawer, and there was $4,000 cash in the drawer, and just strange things like that. And then I started looking into some of the, his phone and things like that, and realizing that he was very heavily into pornography and some other just illegal type of things. So I absolutely devastated. And I went to the pastor and I said, this is all that I've uncovered. And once again, with him, it was more, he just couldn't care less. I mean, like, he had no suggestions. He would say, "Okay, I'll think about it." And then I waited, and I would keep kind of emailing him and saying, "Hey, is this important to you? Are you going to?" "Yeah, yeah, I'm thinking about it." And 6 months went by. And by this point, I was starting to panic, because I started realizing my name was on a lot of the things that he had going on. And so I said to the elders of the church, I sent them a note and said, "I think I need to see a lawyer, because I am afraid of what may happen, because my name's on all of these things." And one of the elders from the church contacted me and said, "If you see a lawyer, we will put you under church discipline,
Oh my.
and you're not allowed to see a lawyer." And so but I said, "I have to." I was really scared about everything going on. I mean, all the theft was still going on, because my husband was refusing to stop any of it. My husband kept telling me, "But you don't understand. I get more money from when I do this." He wouldn't answer any of my questions about where all the money was going. And so I did go and see a lawyer, and the lawyer told me, "You could go to prison for everything that he's put your name on.
Wow.
You have no proof that um, that you didn't know about it. I mean, it was going into a joint banking account. Obviously, you didn't have access to it, but the government's not going to see it that way. You could absolutely go to prison." And they said, "We're surprised he hasn't been caught yet." So I panicked. I went immediately, started shutting down all of his really complex fraud scheme. But of course, who knows if I got all of it? I mean, he kept and at the same time, he was just raging at me. And "I'm going to, take away your car so you can't go to church. And I'm going to, pull your kids out of the school that they're in, because you could," and just becoming very aggressive and threatening to me too. And so I kept going to the pastor, and once again, just, "No, okay, well, I'll think about it." And not really much response. And finally, I said, "If you don't do something, I'm leaving now." And that it was always with the point when I said, I'm going to get a divorce right now if you don't do something," that they finally would say, "Okay, we're going to do something." They said, "We're going to have a meeting." And I said, "Oh, okay, good." So we all had this meeting, and they issued him a letter that said he was rebuked for stealing the money. They didn't say anything about all the sexual stuff that had been going on, which some of it was even quite illegal, but just the money. And they said, "But we rejoice in the fruit of your repentance." That was what they said. And at the same time, they handed me a letter
Wait, wait, wait.
saying that I
Did he
should forgive
actually do
him.
any repenting? Was there any repenting here?
I mean, at the meeting, he did say something about, well, I realize now I probably shouldn't, but entire time he had been fighting me on shutting any of it down. I had to threaten to call the police several times.
Right. So it's the
Um,
words versus the reality. Yeah.
right. And they all knew that, like I had been telling them that. But they just said, well, we don't think he's going to do it again. And they said, if he does, you just need to confront him. And so, oh, the next
I'm
4
sorry.
years,
You've like only been doing this for over 20 years. Oh my
exactly.
goodness. You
But
know,
the next
they're like they're just out of ideas. Because, and I know we're going to talk about this later, because that particular church denomination doesn't allow divorce for much of anything, certainly not the things you mentioned. They're just going to give you a runaround, just going to, play all kinds of games with you, pretending to help you, but in reality, just ensnaring you in that, because from a doctrinal standpoint, they never believed in divorce for these things anyway. And that is what's so bothersome to me, that our churches are so immoral. They think they're godly, but they're immoral. Any heathen with character would do the right and decent thing, but these churches can't do the right and decent thing because of the way they've chosen to interpret certain biblical passages, and I find that to be really upsetting.
The really strange thing to me in all of this was they actually did believe I had grounds for divorce, in the sense that that they do believe that adultery is grounds for divorce, and he had clearly committed adultery. But they were still so against the idea of it that they could not bring themselves to the point of saying that. It was always, well, that was, they would downplay it. Would kept referring to it as a porn problem, even though I repeatedly gave them evidence that was beyond that. But then it'd be, well, that was a one-time thing. That was well, he had been having a hard time. He wasn't, it was, became all of these excuses for him because they just said, the pastor even in fact wrote me a letter saying, um, you should trust the narrative that that he's a changed man, and that you have no reason to doubt his fidelity at this point,
Mm.
which was of course entirely untrue. I mean, I had 20 years worth of reasons to believe that he was still being unfaithful, but that was where they could, it was always an excuse, and now he's fine, and now he'll be fine. And it got to where they were actually angry with me every time I would bring them new evidence because I kept proving their narrative wrong.
Yeah, yeah. And it shows how fragile their mindset is. And Allison, I'm going to come over to you in just a second, but I think what's interesting is that even when you do have legitimate biblical grounds for divorce, and I do believe that abuse and neglect are also biblical grounds for divorce, along with the traditional ones of adultery, sexual immorality, adultery, and abandonment. The ones about abuse and neglect are also in the Bible, but I think they still want you to believe that even with legitimate grounds, it's a sign that you aren't really spiritually mature if you throw in the towel now. And so they turn it on you and say, yeah, you've got biblical grounds, but if you really had the stuff to go the long haul like the rest of us do, if you really had what it took, if you really had the spiritual maturity, you would just gut this out to the very end. And the Bible doesn't say that. After hearing your story so far, I just want to say, whose side are these guys on? I mean, it's pretty clear
Exactly.
that they're on his side. You're having your life destroyed by this man, and they side with the wolf. And this is, it's just wrong. Okay, Allison, same question to you. You've had this horrible situation with a leader who wants every little detail of your sexual life. But when you talk to other leaders, was there any interest in protecting you? Did they want it to be hush hush? Did they have any kind of advice or plan or curriculum? Or did they just give you endless hurdles to jump? What happened next?
Yeah, so my father and ex-father-in-law was one of the elders, and he just dismissed it. Also had another man who was a deacon who had been a very, very close family friend from when I first started attending the church, refused to talk about it. So was shut down by both of them, and then the rest of the church leaders either just didn't believe me or thought I was wrong.
So again, siding with the wolf.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. And so when you finally told them, I want out, I want a divorce, I imagine you did that. What happened?
I received a letter from the pastor, a 5-page letter, explaining how I did not have biblical grounds for divorce, and that he had shared my story, my situation, anonymously with 2 other pastors, and they also agreed that I did not have ground for biblical divorce. And they blamed me for not forgiving
Hmm.
my ex-husband, because my ex-husband had written not 1, but 2 confession letters admitting everything that he'd done. One was in 2008, the other was 2011 or 12,
Hmm.
outlining exactly what he did. And because he did that, I had to forgive him. And because I did not forgive him, according to Matthew 6, your Father in heaven will not forgive you.
Right.
So,
Well, and in this particular interpretation of the scriptures that these people chose to have, it's the instant someone apologizes, then the clock goes back down to 0. It's as if they never ever hurt you. They never ever did anything bad to you ever in your entire life. So you can't, because that would be holding it against them, right?
right,
Counting their wrongs.
right.
And
And you
so,
have to forgive 70 times 7.
right. Forgive
And
times
I
7.
needed to have a biblical view of sexuality, and I did not. I have to forgive and then doing it again.
Yeah, but he fully
Apologizing.
intends to do it again. Yeah.
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 And then I have to forgive him again. Well, how many times can you do it? 70 times 7, Allison. 70 times 7.
Yeah, and 490 times was a long time ago, I bet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Did anyone really try to hold your husband accountable at all? Did they really try, or was all the criticism leveled at you?
All of the criticism was leveled at me. There
Okay.
was one counseling session where the pastor said, well, you had your head in the sand then, right? To my ex.
You
Like,
know
yeah,
you have your head in the sand?
yes.
Meaning what?
Knowing that you're not being loving toward your wife. You
Okay,
know that, right?
right.
Yeah. Forgive me.
Yeah.
Okay, now it's your job to forgive your husband, Allison. And
Wow.
now, oh, you're not forgiving him. And you don't have a biblical view of sexuality. So
Right.
you're wrong.
So, um, what kind of pressure, you tell them that you're going to leave? What kind of pressure did they put on you? How did they try to block you or coerce you to
Yeah.
stay in the
Yeah.
destructive environment?
Yeah. Threatened with church discipline, threatened with Bible verses like Matthew 6:14 and 15. And I'll quote, For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your heavenly Father forgive yours. What do you think is going to happen to you, Allison, if you don't forgive your husband? Your
Right.
Father in heaven is not going to forgive you.
Hmm.
What do you think is going to happen to you?
And there was no room for saying, you know what, I forgive him and I'm never going to let him do it again. I'm going to leave him. Is there, what would
To
they,
that, to
yeah?
that was, what if God said that to you, Allison?
Okay. All right. Um, w- what, I'm going to ask you two questions back to back. What did the leadership claim was their motivation? And what do you suspect was their motivation in coercing you and to stay, threatening you with excommunication and church discipline?
Their claim was love. My understanding was control
Okay.
and
Eh,
power.
Let me ask you this. Are you happier now that you're out?
Yes, much.
How is your level of peace now?
I'm on the journey to peace.
Okay.
But I am no longer in a threatening or controlling, manipulative situation. So
Do you,
healing can take place.
do you have any regrets at all for leaving?
Not for leaving, no.
Okay. All right. Okay, back to you, Caroline. How did the church react when you told them you wanted to leave? Did they try to block you? What pressure did they put on you to stay in this really toxic environment?
There was tremendous pressure. They would say, you don't have the right to divorce him until we go through a process to grant you the divorce. And so then I would say, okay, well, let's start the process then. And then they would say, we're not at that point yet. And it kept going like that for 4 years, where I would keep bringing them more evidence that more stuff was going on. And then they would just kind of get angry at me and be like, well, why are why are you keep bringing this up again? And so it ended up where I was writing them almost, and sometimes almost daily. It was really like at least once a week where I was saying, this is what he's doing, that because I was so trying to get them to understand this was not a past issue, because they just kept saying to me, like they had
Yeah,
said to Allison, well, you
ongoing,
have to
it's
forgive.
contemporary.
No, this is an ongoing situation. And but then they just, it just finally the pastor got to where he just simply stopped responding to me at all, really. um and so in November of 2019, I actually decided to take it to the presbytery, which is the ruling body over the church. It's in Presbyterian churches, they're kind of governed over by the presbytery, which is like the regional body of the church. So I went to them, we started writing letters to other members of the presbytery and saying, can you help me? They won't do anything. And by this point, in spite of everything they knew, my husband was still a trustee at the church, even though he had stolen money from the church and
Oh
everybody
my
else.
goodness.
He was still the children's Sunday school teacher, even though some of his sexual crimes were pretty severe and illegal. And nobody had really taken any steps to do anything other than occasionally to tell him, you probably should stop doing that. So
But the
I thought,
deliberate ignorance, the deliberate
yes,
self-deception is so amazing. It's,
it is. And
yeah,
it just was, I got to the point though, when I realized they're never going to do anything. I realized nothing was going to be enough.
right.
And so I took it to the presbytery, and I found out later the presbytery did agree to meet with the pastor about it. And I found out later that prior to the meeting, he actually distributed a letter to the presbytery, saying that I had been raped by my grandfather and was just mentally ill, which I
Oh
wasn't
my
raped by my
goodness.
grandfather.
So
Um,
when it was time to publicly, or at least within the presbytery, identify the bad guy, it was you, not your husband.
Yeah, he just made it sound like I was this. And what's funny is in that same letter, he even admits that my husband did a lot of those things, but he would kind of downplays it. And the letter was written by the pastor saying things like, well, but he's on the right path now. And but she's still, just because of her experiences with her grandfather, she's overprotective of children. And that's why she's having all of these reactions. And so it made it sound like I was just kind of this really crazy woman. And some of the members of the presbytery later really apologized to me that they didn't take me seriously at the time. So I don't want to throw them under the bus with this, but finally, when I found out that there was even more things going on in January 2019, some really significant things that involved my daughters and some things, and I was just like, I have to leave, I have to go. And so I started trying to plan to get away. And at that point, too, my husband decided he really no longer wanted to be with me. He was tired of all the confronting, the fact that I wouldn't let go of it. I kept digging up and finding things. And he just was starting to say, I want you gone. I want you out of the house. Um, and so ultimately I knew somebody in Maine, and I was like, maybe I can go to Maine for a little while. And my husband was so excited about this that he literally packed up my stuff for me, drove it to Maine and dumped us off in Maine. And then he went back to the church and told them to put me under discipline because I had left him.
The deception marches
Yeah.
on. Oh my
Yes.
goodness.
And at
Uh,
that point, the church did attempt they said I still had to go through the process. And they sent me this questionnaire asking me why I wanted a divorce. Um, and there was a letter that was sent out that said, you shouldn't be divorcing just because you no longer have romantic feelings for him,
oh my
as
goodness.
if that had ever been the issue.
And
Yeah.
this is so common in churches, they treat you like, you just want a grass is greener divorce,
Mhm.
or you miss the single life divorce, or you
Yeah.
just want to go party divorce. They don't realize that you are trying to get out to save your life and sanity, both yours, your children, everyone around you. And,
It was a very dangerous situation. I mean, I was afraid my kids were going to end up in foster care. They were getting involved in illegal stuff. I don't, and I even told the pastor that and said, I'm afraid my kids are going to end up in foster care if I stay with him any longer. And the pastor said to me, well, your children are going to someday leave home anyway. So if they leave a little sooner, that shouldn't, your first concern shouldn't be them. You need to be devoted to your husband.
I mean, that kind of callous attitude is shocking. I brought it up before to even any heathen or any atheist, what is wrong with these people?
Yeah.
Uh, what is wrong? And so let me ask you the same question I asked Allison. What did the leadership claim was their motivation in doing all this? And what do you suspect was their genuine motivation?
Their claim was always that they were doing what was best for me. There was always this attitude of, well, divorce means you're probably going to end up poor and on welfare. And then we want your family to be healthy and happy, and for your marriage to be good. And so that was what they would always say. But I really think their motivation was, again, it was about control. I think the pastor didn't want to lose me and everything I was doing for the church, and thought that if he forced us to stay together, it would stabilize. I mean, I think that because I was so integrated to the church and so was my husband at that point, they thought that would negatively affect the church. But more than anything, I just think they didn't care. And that's what the conclusion I've come to over time is, I don't think they cared whether I was dead or alive. I don't think they cared whether my children were suffering or being abused. I don't think that they cared about any of it. And so um, I think that was why, in my case, essentially, they just weren't very responsive, never really responded very much, which is kind of do something if I nag them a lot, and a little bit, just enough to kind of get me off their back a bit.
Just
And
to appease you and get you to sweep it under the carpet.
exactly. And that they thought eventually I would just kind of shut up and go away. I think that's what they thought would happen.
Yeah, what a tragedy. What an absolute failure of Christian love and responsibility. Let's move on to a different area. You're divorced today, and I want to know how it's going. I think my first question to you, Caroline, is going to be the one I already asked Allison, which is, any regrets? Are you living in poverty? Are your children juvenile delinquents? What's going on?
Nothing they said about that was true. Absolutely nothing they said. I have never regretted it for a single day. I wish I had divorced way earlier than I did. I mean, I wished I'd never married him to begin with, but I should not have lasted, especially those 4 years that I was trying to get the church to help me divorce him or to agree to me divorcing him. I have a wonderful life now. I'm much more financially secure than I ever was with him because I don't have him stealing my money all the time. So it took a little while to
Seeing
get
how
on
that
my feet.
works.
Yeah. But my kids are doing great. One of my daughters is very happily married. My other daughter has a full scholarship to start college this year, and all of them are attend church and doing good. And it just this idea that I was going to somehow end up in this tragic life has never been the case. And lots of friends, reconnected with a lot of them, of old friends and family. So it's been great.
That's great. So no financial anxiety because the one causing you financial anxiety is gone.
Exactly.
How has your relationship with the Lord changed over the years?
I think that it's strengthened it in many ways because I've I think previously I had so much of my identity built on how much I could do that if I had to do enough, and that was why with the church that I was in, I've never felt like I was doing enough to be important to God because I was looking at whether I was important to the pastor, and I just never was. Uh, I mean, what I was doing was he liked what I was doing, but I as a person was not important to him. And so that's the way I felt like that God saw me too. And so all my identity was built on why can't I do enough to make God, help me in this situation? And I've since realized, I say now, I realized I'm a whole person by myself, that I didn't need my husband to complete me. And I didn't need my husband to be somehow my conduit to God or something. Jesus loves me. And it's not dependent on my pastor and it's not dependent on my husband. Um, and so I do have a good relationship with the church I'm in now and wonderful relationship with my pastors where I am, and they're very supportive of me. But I also feel like I don't need that in order to survive like I thought I did. And so it's very freeing to realize that God doesn't love you because you did enough stuff, that he just loves you. And that has increased, I think, my amazement about God, that I realized that it never was about that he cared just as much for me when I first arrived in Maine and I was broke and I had nothing going for me as some years later when I'm doing much better and doing a lot more. So, um, yeah, that's, I think, how it's affected me really in a positive sense and a lot more just confidence in my faith and and in Christ himself.
Allison, same questions to you. Financial anxiety, how has the relationship with the Lord changed over the years? What are those like today?
Certainly. Yeah, I do not have children. Now,
Okay.
one of the things that confirmed for me that this marriage was not going to work was miscarrying a set of twins in
Oh, so sorry.
2010.
I'm very
So that was the catalyst really for like this is not gonna be. I started thinking about this is not how I would want to raise children. So like this is not so I have not had other children since. So I do not have children. Just happened to work out that way. But today I have developed and started my own business. I do massage therapy um, regularly and have developed and support myself fully with the massage therapy business. So
Congratulations.
that's going well. It's been steady and that's going well, and I love it. So that's been a real joy in my life. So my relationship with the Lord has been rocky because I had to undo who I thought God was. One of the last emails I sent was, is this really the God that I serve? That he would require me to do these things that are uncomfortable, that require me to stay in an abusive situation. This is not the God I want to serve. This God is a sadist. Like this is not the God. I mean, if this is the God of the Bible, then that's not I don't want anything to do with him.
Yeah.
So I started the journey of discovering who God is. Who is God? And it's still a work in progress. I am still discovering God is bigger than the church. The the church, this church, these mindset is they believe that they have the power to destroy or enhance your relationship with God. You have to go through them to have that they have control over your relationship with God. That God is confined to this little box that they put him in, and he's not. He's not. He's everywhere. He's omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient. I may not be saying that correctly,
You said it
but I
perfectly.
believe you know what I'm trying to say.
Yep. No, you said it perfectly.
Yeah, but God is everywhere. He's not this guy in the sky. He's in everything. He's in you. He's in your heart. He's in your being. He's in your nature. And those are that's the God that I'm looking for. That's the God that I'm seeing
Yeah.
now. That God is love. There's
One,
no room for abuse when love is present. And one of the principles that this particular denomination teaches is unconditional love.
mhm.
However, they don't practice it.
Exactly. Or they only practice it to the wolves,
Yeah,
not to the innocent victims.
right.
And that's a real blindness that many churches have. Sometimes I think they actually, want to be seen as bending over backwards for the greatest of sinners, but they forget that those sinners have a trail of victims in their wake. Let's see them step forth and really help out the victims. Last two questions. Do you have a favorite Bible verse that has carried you through? And then I want you to talk directly to the person who's watching this right now. There's somebody watching this right now who is in your shoes. They're being faced with church discipline. They're being told by their pastor, why don't you forgive? You need to forgive. Can't you just stop talking about this? Now you're being nitpicky. You're trying to find fault all the time. What hope can you give others who want to save their life and sanity and get a life-saving divorce? We will start with Caroline.
You can get my cat down here. She loves being up here when I'm on Zoom calls.
Yeah, hi.
Um, I have actually the verse that carried me through was that uh, in the Psalms where it says, where the Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? And that line, whom shall I fear, stuck with me because at that point that I had newly arrived in Maine, just been dumped there by my husband, had lost my church, lost everything I'd been fighting so hard to keep, lost my house, lost everything that I built up. And I thought at that point, it suddenly dawned on me like, I don't have anything left that everything I was afraid of actually happened. And and I'm still standing. And so at that point, that kind of empowers you to say, you know what, someone who has nothing left to lose doesn't have any reason to be afraid anymore. And so I found that a very powerful idea for me that to say I don't have to be afraid of trying new things, of jumping out there, getting the divorce, starting a new life, all those things, because what's there to lose at this point? And so I just felt like that with that God just, I would say, I feel like there are, the armies in the hills, as the picture from, what is it, Elisha, where, they surrounded by the chariots and horses of fire, and that somehow there would be salvation in all of this. And so I think that that was what I really held on to, and turned out ultimately to be absolutely true. And if to someone who is watching this, I would say, I think we get too caught up sometimes in trying to prove ourselves to other people, or to convince the person that is abusing us to be nicer to us and to change, or to convince someone else that there's this idea that somehow you have to convince everyone and you have to get everyone to support you. And in the end, the person that's going to save you is you, and you and God helping you. And so there's that famous quote, I think, from I forget who it was, but it was a former slave who said, I prayed for many years and I never got an answer until I prayed with my feet. And
Rick
so
Douglas.
that was, sometimes you have to pray with your feet. You have to get out of there, get up and go. And I would say too that just because someone tells you it's going to be a disaster doesn't necessarily mean it is. And I do domestic violence work now as a job. And so I've heard many, many stories, and I would never promise someone that everything's going to turn out fine. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, kids are negatively impacted by things. Sometimes it doesn't always come up roses about everything, but I've never heard someone regret they got a divorce, even so. I've never heard someone who is in an abusive relationship say, I wish I'd stayed. And I've now been doing this for years and haven't heard it. And so I would encourage you to reach out for help beyond that church community that's not supportive, and be willing to just say, I may lose some friends, I may lose some family over this, but there's going to be something better on the other side. Because in this case, when an abuse situation, the grass is absolutely greener on the other side. 100%. Don't stay in the desert. There's no need to stay in the desert. It is greener on the other side.
Yeah, there's scientific studies that show that people who are in long, really destructive marriages, usually they are happier when they divorce, whether they stay single or remarry. Being with someone who's toxic, selfish, destructive, lying, hateful, mean, cruel, or totally neglectful is just so bad for your mental health and your physical health as well.
Yes,
Let's toss it over
absolutely.
to Allison. Do you have any favorite Bible verse or affirmation that carried you through? And what would you like to say? What hope can you give those who are in the shoes you were in several years ago?
So my favorite Bible verse has been Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper and not harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. So that verse, I've loved that verse ever since I was a child, and that verse that's a promise from God, and that is something that carried me through these last several years of recovering from this circumstance. What I would say to you who may be in this situation is your safety matters more than anything the church tells you. If you go to your pastor and you go to your church leaders and their response is anything but, okay, let's get you to safety, they're not going to help you. There is help out there, and that is one thing, that Caroline has been very diligent in starting, and we have started that nonprofit organization, the Presbyterian Advocacy Coalition, because there was not a place for us like that to turn to when we were in it.
So
So there is help.
you've built this within the Presbyterian Church. Good for you.
Yeah, it's in the process, yes. However, there is a place to go, and there are other people that you can go to. Your doctor, for one. Your doctor can connect you to resources to get you to safety, but your safety is number one. God cares more about your safety than staying in an abusive marriage. God will still love you.
Absolutely.
God will be right beside you as you get out and heal.
Absolutely. He's walking the path. Jesus is walking the path with you.
Mhm.
And it's so important to remember. Well, I know people will get a lot of courage from listening to your story. If you will send me the information about your group, I will put it in the show notes so people can get in touch with you. Of course, there's the Life Saving Divorce group on Facebook. It's a private group. You can request to be a member if you want support. And it's amazing how all over the world, Christians in highly toxic marriages are asking the same question over and over. I get the same questions in these groups today that I got 25 years ago when I started doing divorce recovery. I just want to say that the Lord will walk with you, and that many of us have found that the Lord has restored the years the locusts have eaten. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Gretchen.
Gretchen.
Bye-bye. If you benefited from this recording, you will find support and clarity in my book, The Life Saving Divorce, available in paperback or Kindle on Amazon. You can also follow me, Gretchen Baskerville, online at lifesavingdivorce.com or on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Instagram. You can sign up for my email list at lifesavingdivorce.com. Women and men of faith may request to join my private online Facebook group, Life Saving Divorce Private Group. For more on life-saving divorces, please subscribe and click the link to the next recording.